The phone rang at 3:47 a.m. It didn't sound like a phone. It sounded like a blade, sharp, cold, slicing straight through the heavy Florida humidity that clung to the walls of Eleanor Hayes's rented apartment. She woke as if jerked by invisible strings, her body moving before her mind caught up. 40 years in uniform had burned discipline into her marrow. She sat upright, back rigid, eyes sweeping the room as though hostile fire might follow the sound. The second ring was cut short as she grabbed the receiver. "Hello?" For a moment. Only silence, then a whisper, so faint she thought she had dreamed it. "Grandmother, please, help me." The line went dead. Eleanor froze. Her pulse hammered so violently it felt like it might burst through her ribs. She had never been a grandmother. Michael, her only living child, had been married just 18 months. No one had ever mentioned a child. She should have dismissed it. A prank call, perhaps. Her rational brain listed the possibilities in neat military order. But the voice, fragile, breathless, terrified, had carved into her like shrapnel. It sounded like Rebecca. Eleanor shut her eyes. The name alone was enough to slice old scars open. 22 years had passed since the accident. Yet there were nights she swore she still heard Rebecca calling out across the dark. Rebecca. The daughter she hadn't saved. Her hands shook as she reached for her jeans, boots, car keys. Within 10 minutes, she was on the road, headlights cutting through the sticky fog. She told herself it was irrational. But instincts had saved her life too many times to ignore. And something about that whisper, "Grandmother, please help me," had felt less like chance and more like a summons. The highway stretched ahead, empty but for the shadows of palmetto trees leaning like silent witnesses. For 2 hours the past rode with her. She thought of Marcus Delacroix, the 19-year-old private who had bled out in her arms in Kandahar. She could still feel his weight, hear his cracked whisper, "Tell my mom I tried to be brave." She had written to his mother every month since then, letters filled with pieces of herself she didn't know how else to give. But none of it had filled the hollow space Rebecca left. And Michael, her son, her last link. She had tried to love him fiercely, but grief had twisted her affection into something distant, brittle. She'd kept him at arm's length, terrified that loving him too openly would invite fate to rip him away too. The green glow of the GPS pulled her out of memory. Tampa Bay, residential neighborhood, Michael's address. The house appeared, modest, with blue shutters and a neat yard. But something was wrong. No lights, no car, newspapers littering the porch. Eleanor parked, approached like a soldier advancing into uncertain ground. Her eyes catalogued the anomalies: overflowing mailbox, unopened package warped by rain, silence pressing against the windows. She knocked, no answer. The spare key was still hidden beneath the painted turtle rock. She opened the door and stepped into stale air. Inside was neglect. Dust, empty picture frames on the mantel, as though someone had stripped the walls of memory. On the kitchen table lay scattered documents, insurance forms, lab results. One word leapt out like a gunshot: cancer, stage 4, pancreatic, terminal. Her breath caught. Michael, her boy, had been dying, and she hadn't known. Her knees weakened, but she forced herself upright, jaw clenched, because weakness was a luxury she'd never allowed. Then, footsteps on the porch, a knock. She opened the door to a young officer, Rodriguez, who spoke gently, cautiously, words blurred together. "Suspicious activity. We regret to inform. Michael Hayes died 19 days ago. Wife disappeared. Child in temporary foster care." Each word was another bullet. Eleanor kept her face stone hard, but inside something shattered. "There is a child?" she asked. "Yes, Emma, 8 years old. Victoria claimed she was hers from a previous relationship. The girl hasn't spoken since the night Victoria disappeared. Trauma specialists say she likely witnessed something." Eleanor's voice cut sharp, soldier-like. "Where is she?" The foster house was warm, bright. Toys in the yard, the scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Susan Morrison, the caretaker, met them with kindness in her eyes. "She doesn't trust adults," Susan warned. "She startles easily, she only draws, but she keeps drawing the same image, a little girl with an older woman beside her." Through the window, Eleanor saw the child beneath an oak tree. Dark hair, knees hugged to chest, eyes scanning the yard with hypervigilance Eleanor recognized from war zones. "Emma." Eleanor crouched on the grass a few feet away. "Hello, Emma. I'm Eleanor. I was Michael's mother." Emma studied her, silent, then pulled out paper and crayon. She drew quickly, hands tense but precise. When finished, she showed Eleanor. A house, 3 figures, one adult man, one small child with long hair, and a third figure apart, marked with a bold X. "The bad lady," Eleanor softly. Emma nodded, drew again. A syringe. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Emma, did you see what happened to Michael? The child's hand went to her pocket. She pulled out a small wooden bird, its feathers carved with extraordinary care. She held it to her chest, then whispered, the first word since her father's death. She hurt him. Eleanor's heart clenched. She wanted to gather the child in her arms, shield her from every shadow. Instead, she extended her palm. Emma placed the bird in it. Michael made this for me, Emma said. When the bad lady got angry, her voice was cracked, unused, but strong enough to pierce Eleanor's armor. Eleanor closed her hand over the bird. Emma, I'm going to keep you safe. That's a promise. The wooden bird felt alive in Eleanor's palm. Smooth, feathered lines pressed into her skin as though her son's hands still lingered there. Michael had carved this. Michael, who had never shown the slightest interest in woodworking as a boy. She remembered scraped knees, baseball gloves, toy soldiers lined up in rows, but not this kind of quiet craft. It was Rebecca who had been the artist. Rebecca, with sketchbooks filled with forests and mockingbirds, dreams of art school that had died with her on a wet Seattle street 2 decades earlier. Eleanor turned the carving slowly. Each feather was etched with care, with patience. It was unmistakable. The same gentle style Rebecca had once practiced. Who taught him? She whispered to herself. Emma's gaze flickered. He said, someone special. Did he say a name? Emma hesitated, then nodded. Rebecca. The name landed like a strike to the chest. Eleanor's throat closed. Michael had known. He had known about his sister, about the tragedy Eleanor had buried beneath layers of silence and discipline. Her vision blurred. The oak tree above them swayed in the dawn breeze, branches whispering like voices she thought she had silenced. Susan Morrison touched Eleanor's shoulder lightly. She's opening up to you. That's a big step, but Eleanor barely heard her. Her eyes were fixed on Emma, on the child's fragile strength, the way her small hands clutched the bird like a lifeline. Emma, Eleanor said gently, forcing her voice steady, would you like to come with me to Michael's house? It could be our house now, safe, together. Emma stared at her, studying every line of Eleanor's face. The scrutiny was too knowing for an 8-year-old, like a soldier deciding whether to trust a commanding officer. Finally, Emma drew again. A house. On the roof, she sketched a tiny bird. Then she tore the paper in half, keeping the side with the house and figures, pushing the side with the X'd-out woman toward Eleanor. Eleanor understood. The bad part stayed behind. The good part went forward. I promise, Emma, she said quietly, holding the torn paper. No one will hurt you while you're with me. That's not just a promise. It's an oath. Emma's eyes softened. She reached for Eleanor's hand. Michael's house was waiting, dim and heavy with absence. Eleanor led Emma inside, step by careful step. The air was stale. Dust lay thick on the mantel. But there were traces of him everywhere. His jacket slung over a chair, a book face down on the armrest, an unfinished cup of coffee fossilized in the sink. Emma drifted ahead, small fingers trailing along the walls. Her steps carried the weight of memory. This had been her home. Eleanor could see it in the way she glanced toward corners, as if expecting to find Michael stepping out with a smile. His room, Emma whispered, her voice thin but determined. She led Eleanor upstairs. They entered a modest bedroom, neat but lived in. Emma went straight to the closet, crouched, and pulled at a box tucked behind old shoes. The key, she said, pointing to the bedside table. Sure enough, taped underneath was a small brass key. Eleanor unlocked the box. Inside lay documents, meticulously ordered. Private investigator reports, hospital records, copies of police files, and at the bottom a locket. Eleanor opened it with trembling fingers. One side held Rebecca, 16, smiling into the camera. The other side, Eleanor herself, younger, in uniform beside a jeep. Tears burned her eyes. He had carried Rebecca with him. He had carried her. Then an envelope, her name on the front in Michael's careful hand. She unfolded the letter, words swimming through her tears. Mom, if you're reading this, it means something has happened. I've known about Rebecca since I was 16. I found her death certificate by accident. I know how you've carried the guilt, but it wasn't your fault. You loved us the best you knew how. I need you to forgive yourself. Emma is not Victoria's child. She's mine in every way that matters. Please protect her. She's in danger. She needs you. And Mom, please remember Rebecca wouldn't want you to live broken forever. Eleanor's hands shook. The paper blurred. Her son had known. He had carried her secret in silence for years. Emma pressed closer, small fingers tugging Eleanor's sleeve. "There's more," she whispered. She reached into the box and pulled a folded cloth. Inside was a silver compass, Eleanor's compass, the one she had given Michael at graduation. He said, "You'd need this," Emma murmured, "to find your way home." The needle spun wildly, then stilled. True north. For the first time in decades, Eleanor felt direction return to her bones. Night fell heavy. Emma curled against the couch, clutching the wooden bird. Eleanor sat nearby, the letter in her lap, the compass in her palm. The house was silent, but not empty. Every wall hummed with memory. Eleanor whispered into the dark, "I won't fail you this time, Michael. I won't fail you, Rebecca." She looked at Emma, small and breakable, yet holding the kind of strength only survivors carried. This time, she vowed, "I will be enough." Morning light seeped through the blinds in thin, pale bars. Eleanor hadn't slept. She sat at the kitchen table, compass in one hand, Michael's letter in the other, while Emma dozed lightly on the couch with the wooden bird pressed to her chest. The stillness pressed down, heavy and unfamiliar. In war, stillness meant danger, meant the quiet before an ambush. Here, in her son's abandoned house, it meant something worse. The echo of all the words never spoken. Rebecca's voice came back to her in flashes. "Mom, you'll be there, right? You promised." And Michael's smile, always careful, always distant, as if he knew his mother loved him but feared being loved too closely. Eleanor pressed her hand to her eyes. "I failed them both." A knock startled her upright. She moved silently to the door, muscle memory kicking in. Her fingers brushed the pistol she had carried even in retirement. She peered through the window. A woman stood on the porch, dark blazer, sharp eyes, hair pulled back tight. Not police, not neighbor. She carried the weight of authority in the set of her shoulders. "Mrs. Hayes?" the woman asked when the door opened. "I'm Agent Sarah Martinez, FBI. May I come in?" The living room became a briefing room. Files spread across the coffee table, photographs and names spilling out like pieces of a war plan. Emma sat silently in the corner, drawing birds, though her eyes never stopped flicking toward the adults. Martinez's tone was brisk, but not unkind. "We've been investigating a woman who went by the name Victoria Hayes. Her real identity is Sarah Chen. We believe she is responsible for at least 6 deaths. Your sons may have been one of them." Eleanor's jaw clenched. She had braced for the words, but hearing them still cracked something inside. "How?" Martinez slid a photo across the table. Sarah with Michael, smiling at what looked like a family barbecue. "She targets men who are isolated, recently divorced, wealthy or vulnerable. Gains their trust, drains their resources, then ensures their deaths look natural. In Michael's case, we suspect she exploited his cancer diagnosis, delayed treatment, staged complications. And then," she hesitated, glancing at Emma. Eleanor's voice was steel. "Say it. A lethal insulin injection, witnessed by the child." Silence swelled. Eleanor's gaze shifted to Emma. The girl was drawing again, lines harsh and jagged. A syringe, black crayon, pressed so hard it tore the paper. Eleanor's throat burned. She forced herself to stay still, to breathe evenly, because fury would only frighten the child. "What about the mother?" she asked, voice low. "Disappeared. We've tracked her across multiple states under different names. She's careful. She leaves no loose ends, except this time she left Emma." Hours later, Eleanor sat alone on the porch. The Florida heat wrapped around her like a suffocating blanket, but she barely felt it. Rebecca's face lingered in her mind, overlapping with Sarah Chen's in the photographs. 2 teenagers in a grainy picture, side by side, one lost too soon, the other turned into a predator. She had failed Rebecca, she had failed Michael. And now Emma sat inside, trembling behind her drawings, the last fragile thread. Eleanor pulled the compass from her pocket. The needle quivered, then steadied. She whispered to herself, "North, always north, no turning back." That evening, Emma surprised her. The child padded into the kitchen, barefoot, clutching her sketchbook. She laid it on the table in front of Eleanor. It wasn't just birds this time. It was a map, rough, childlike, but unmistakable. A street, a house. The woman with sharp hair and dark eyes standing in the doorway. Eleanor leaned forward. "You drew this from memory?" Emma nodded. Her lips parted, voice faint but certain. "She lives there." Eleanor's breath caught. A lead, a chance. She reached across the table, covering Emma's small hand with her own. "You did well, sweetheart. You're braver than you know." Emma blinked at her, then whispered, "Will she come back?" The question cut deep. Eleanor thought of Sarah's cold gaze in the photographs, the meticulous way she infiltrated lives. A woman like that didn't just vanish. She won't touch you again, Eleanor said firmly. Not while I'm here. Emma studied her face as if weighing the truth. Then, for the first time, she leaned forward and rested her head against Eleanor's arm. The gesture was small, tentative. But to Eleanor, it felt heavier than any medal she had ever worn. She placed the compass on the table beside Emma's sketchbook. We'll find our way together. The night deepened. The house creaked with old wood and unspoken memories. Eleanor stayed awake, listening to Emma's breathing from the couch. When sleep finally stole over her, it brought a dream. Rebecca, standing by a river, her hands cupped around a small bird. Michael beside her, smiling, Emma's hand tucked in his. They were waiting for her. She reached out, but the dream dissolved into darkness, leaving her with one truth burning in her chest. This time she would not let go. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm. Eleanor woke early, made oatmeal with too much cinnamon. Rebecca had loved cinnamon, and coaxed Emma to eat. They walked around the block, the girl clinging close but slowly learning to lift her eyes to the sky, counting birds instead of shadows. Every night, Eleanor read Michael's letter again. She traced each word until they felt burned into her skin. Protect her. She's in danger. She needs you. The compass never left her pocket, but danger was already circling. It began with the car. A black sedan parked across the street. Same spot, 3 nights in a row, no plates, windows tinted dark. Eleanor's training screamed at her, surveillance. She said nothing to Emma, but kept the child close, curtains drawn, every lock double-checked. She cleaned her pistol and slid it beneath the cushion where she sat reading. The foster worker Susan called. There's concern about Emma staying with you long-term. Your age, your record of overseas service. There are questions about stability. Unless custody is formalized, Eleanor cut her off. She's not going anywhere. When the call ended, her hands shook. Not from fear, but from fury. The system had failed her son, failed Rebecca. It would not fail Emma. One evening, Emma brought her a drawing unlike the others. It showed a girl, Rebecca, unmistakably, standing with another girl, their hands linked. Beside them, Eleanor's figure loomed, blurred at the edges. She was her friend, Emma whispered. The bad lady. Eleanor's pulse faltered. Rebecca's friend? Emma nodded. She said, it was her fault. The room tilted. The compass rolled across the table, spinning wildly. Sarah Chen, the name on the FBI file, the predator who had killed Michael, the woman who had stolen Emma. She had once been Rebecca's friend. The twist cut deeper than any knife. The enemy wasn't a stranger. She had been inside Eleanor's family for decades, a ghost tied to Rebecca's death. Emma's eyes searched her face. Is it true? Eleanor swallowed hard. Yes, but it's not your fault. And it's not Rebecca's. She gathered the child into her arms, holding on as if anchoring herself to the last thing unbroken. But inside, fury raged like wildfire. If Sarah Chen wanted to finish what she had started, she would have to go through Eleanor Hayes. And Eleanor was done losing. The hunt began quietly. Agent Martinez fed Eleanor fragments of data. Motel receipts, a license under yet another alias, whispers of someone fitting Sarah's description in Miami. Eleanor pieced it together at night, the way she had pieced together enemy movements overseas. Each clue was a breadcrumb. Each breadcrumb a reminder that Sarah was still out there breathing the same air. But the closer Eleanor drew to the truth, the more Emma's silence grew heavy. The girl rarely spoke, except in murmurs about the bad lady. But her eyes said more than words ever could. They carried the weight of something unspeakable, something Eleanor feared would break her if voiced aloud. One night, Eleanor found Emma awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor, her drawings scattered like fallen leaves. This time, the pages showed not birds but needles. A man slumped in a chair. Michael. Emma's hands trembled. I saw her. She gave him the shot. He said he was tired, but she heard him. I tried to scream. Her small body shook, tears spilling hot and fast. Eleanor wrapped her arms around her, whispering, You were brave, Emma. You survived. That's the bravest thing of all. In that moment, Eleanor understood. Emma wasn't just a child in need of protection. She was a witness, the only one who could reveal what really happened. And that made her a target. The subplot haunted Eleanor at night. Marcus Delacroix, the young private from Kandahar, appeared in her dreams, his face pale, eyes filled with trust she hadn't deserved. She woke sweating, gasping, the weight of his dying words pressing down. Tell my mom I tried to be brave. Now she looked at Emma and saw Marcus's eyes, his trust, his fragile courage. She whispered into the dark, This time I won't fail. This time I'll bring them home. The trail led Eleanor and Martinez to a storage unit in Miami. Inside, wigs, passports, syringes, children's toys, and a wall of photographs, men, women, children, faces crossed out in red ink. At the center, Rebecca Hayes, 17, smiling. Beside her, Eleanor in uniform, arm draped across her daughter's shoulders. The sight tore the breath from her lungs. Martinez muttered, "She's been obsessed with your family for years." Eleanor stepped closer, eyes burning. "This isn't obsession, this is war." The next blow came swiftly. Emma collapsed at breakfast, clutching her chest. Hospital monitors beeped frantically. Doctors whispered about congenital defects, heart murmurs, unexplained toxins in her system. Eleanor's mind raced. Sarah's cruelty stretched beyond murder. She had poisoned the child slowly, keeping her weak, dependent. But Emma fought through the pain, clutching Eleanor's hand. Her voice was barely audible. "Don't leave me." Tears stung Eleanor's eyes. "Never." It was the same promise she had failed to keep for Rebecca, for Michael, for Marcus. This time it would not break. The confrontation came in a sterile prison visiting room. Sarah Chen, shackled but unbowed, smiled with venom when Eleanor entered. "You look older," Sarah said, voice smooth. "Not weaker, though. That's the problem. You never break." Eleanor's voice was ice. "You killed my son. You tried to kill Emma. Why?" Sarah's smile twisted. "Because you left Rebecca. She was my only friend. You chose your wars. She died. Do you know what that did to me?" Her eyes glistened, not with regret, but with a fractured love, curdled into hate. "I loved her," Sarah whispered. "And you stole her from me. So I took Michael. I took Emma. I made you watch your family crumble. That was justice." Eleanor leaned forward, fists clenched. "No, that was cowardice. Rebecca's death was an accident. What you've done is a choice, and Emma will never be yours." Sarah's composure cracked, rage flooding her face. But Eleanor had already seen enough. The woman across from her wasn't a monster born, it was a broken girl twisted by grief. And for the first time, Eleanor felt not just rage, but pity. Back at the hospital, Emma's condition worsened. The toxins in her system had left permanent scars. Surgery was risky. The decision tore Eleanor apart: stay by her side or pursue the evidence that could lock Sarah away forever. She chose Emma. Surgery stretched long into the night. Eleanor sat by the window, compass in hand, whispering prayers she didn't know she still remembered. At dawn, the surgeon emerged. "She made it. She's a fighter." Eleanor's knees buckled with relief. Weeks later, Emma stood on the tarmac in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Her grandmother Maria wept as she gathered the child into her arms. Carlos, the uncle, knelt to embrace her too. But Emma's small hand stayed wrapped around Eleanor's until the last possible moment. "Don't go," she whispered. Eleanor knelt, pressing the compass into Emma's palm. "I'll always be with you. Follow north and you'll find me." Emma clutched it tightly, eyes shimmering. "Promise?" Eleanor smiled, tears breaking free at last. "Promise." The sun set over the Caribbean, painting the sky in fire and gold. Eleanor stood watching the family reunite, the hollow in her chest no longer empty but filled with something new. Not victory, not peace, something quieter, forgiveness. Rebecca's laughter echoed faintly in her memory. Michael's smile returned in Emma's eyes. Marcus's voice whispered, "You didn't fail this time." For the first time in decades, Eleanor Hayes felt the weight lift. She turned north and walked home.